Is it worth it to drive for Uber and Lyft later in 2024? With all these big things going on with Uber and Lyft, is it worth it or not? This is going to be very raw, unedited fireside chat style video. I do these every once in a while, but I haven't really posted one of these in a while. I know I've done a lot of videos about like the Uber app, the Lyft app. I've talked a lot about also different things with accounting, right? I kind of make a variety of different videos on this channel, basically about making money, the gig economy, etc. This is an interesting one because I think every so often, one of the big things I see all the time when I'm looking at like different videos and content about Lyft and Uber is it worth it or not? I think that's a general question for pretty much anything. Like, is it worth it to do X, Y, or Z? And when it comes to being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver, I think there are a lot of tricky things. And I've done a tremendous amount of videos about the pros and the cons, right? I've done a bajillion of them. All my subscribers know this. And I think this is one video I want to kind of do. It's almost like an update style video because at the end of 2023 or the end of last year / the beginning of this year, my view is very pessimistic. And I said in those videos when I was talking about is it worth it or not, should you drive for Lyft and Uber in 2024, et cetera, my viewpoint was more pessimistic. And the fact of most of those videos was kind of like, you know what? I think we're in almost the dark era of Uber and Lyft. That was my honest kind of perspective. And I think the reason why is the big triple threat, as I called it. That drivers are getting paid way less than ever before. That Uber and Lyft is taking out a higher cut than ever before of the earnings. Inflation's higher, so you're spending more money on gas, maintenance on your car, et cetera, et cetera. And I might even add this fourth one, right? This is kind of a new one, if I'd call it that, for 2024. And then there's too many drivers being on the road. There are way more drivers, if you look at like the numbers, signing up to be a driver compared to passengers taking. Yes, there are more passengers than ever taking Ubers and Lyfts, and that is increasing. Every day, there's more and more people signing up with Uber and Lyft to use it. There's more and more rides happening every day if you look at the growth. Same thing with drivers, though. And the spread is a big one, meaning sometimes the drivers, and a lot of times, are now outweighing the passengers, which means it's harder for drivers to get a ride when it comes to doing Uber and Lyft in general. This is a huge issue, and I've talked about this. I think the big thing right now that I've been seeing, though, as kind of like, I don't want to call it a saving grace, but as like a light at the end of the tunnel, if I'd call it that, a light at the end of the tunnel, as if like now, given that rock bottom that we just had, I feel like things are now finally kind of on the upswing. And what I mean is with everything going on in Massachusetts, or everything, let me take that back, that happened, I think a better way to word that, with Massachusetts, the drivers are now getting, a very good minimum hourly wage, paid sick leave, of different things that usually only employees get. That's huge. The fact that we have things going on in Minneapolis, the fact that we have things going on here in California, for example, although Prop 22 just kind of got stamped in stone again. I just did a video about that. I think even still, what you're seeing in a lot of different areas as 2024 has been progressing is a lot more of legal noise, if I'd call it that, surrounding the whole idea of Uber drivers and Lyft drivers not getting paid enough, being taken advantage of, wrongful deactivations, and a lot more. I've covered each one of these topics a lot on this channel, and again, this video is meant to be both a fireside chat style video, but kind of like a global overview video. As opposed to me making a video about the tree, for example, a very specific issue, this video is about the forest, the overarching picture. And for me, looking at everything, because I've probably read hundreds, if not thousands of articles about Uber and Lyft since I started doing videos on this channel, and I gotta say that in 2024, I've never seen so many little articles and news things popping up about, wow, drivers are being taken advantage of. Uber's now getting caught doing this. Lyft and Uber just got audited, for example, like I said, in Massachusetts, and they owe hundreds of millions of dollars in back pay. All these different things are popping up over and over and over again. These are all massive amounts of issues. And I feel like last year in 2023, there was, and I might even say 2022 as well, but I'd say more 2023, a lot of drivers were complaining. And guess what? Nobody was really listening. I mean, some people were, don't get me wrong, but I feel like it was kind of like you're just screaming out to an empty space or an empty room where no one's paying attention to you. And I feel like now, what I've seen as the year's been progressing on, a lot more people are listening. A lot more, which I think is the most important thing, lawmakers are finally listening. People in legislative bodies or entities are now listening and saying, oh, wow, drivers are getting screwed over. There's been this gray area for a while, but now, we got to make something clear cut. And like I said, I think Uber and Lyft, whether it's intentional or unintentional, is kind of paving its own path from a legal perspective or a payroll perspective of not being independent contractors, but also not being employees. You're kind of independent contractors with benefits. And I think Uber and Lyft, I think, is probably the first, I mean, you could argue this, depending on how you look at it. I think it's the first career industry or jobs, what do you want to say, that kind of, I think, fits that category better than any other job. That it is truly paving that path as a unique middle ground that never really used to exist. I think this is huge. And then why do I say all this? Why do I say all this? Why am I going down this rabbit hole of like independent contractors versus employees, being treated right, being treated fairly, etc.? It's mainly because I think with the improvement of what's going on with Uber and Lyft, although it's a little bit slow and it's not perfect, and we have a long way to go, I think it's now becoming, if I had to give you like a stance, more and more worth it now to be a driver, right? And I know some people may be watching this video saying, no, Mark, absolutely not. Uber and Lyft sucks, is the worst companies to drive for. I hate driving for them. But like I've said in a lot of other videos, I continue every single time I go out to interview my drivers. I read a lot of the comments on this channel. I interact with some of the comments. I talk to a lot of people both online and offline regarding Uber and Lyft. And I gotta be honest, which again still blows a lot of people's minds when they read the comments on this channel, because 90% of them are negative towards Uber and Lyft. Most drivers love it. Most drivers are very happy about it. I gotta be honest. Most drivers that I interview in person, 75% of them really do love it because you're like, hey, I have a flexible schedule. We all know the benefits. I have a flexible schedule. I have instant cash outs. I'm making a good amount of money. If you compare driving for Uber and Lyft to another field or career I used to do, it's way better. I don't have to take time off when it comes to having a boss. I pretty much have an unlimited amount of work I can do. If I want to drive for 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, I can do that. If I want to drive one day for 5 hours, I can do that. I don't have to worry about not having enough hours. Like say if I was working another job where I ask for more hours and my boss says, hey, sorry, we're booked. We can't book you for any more hours. You can't make any more money. Not really the case with Uber and Lyft, right? I interviewed one driver when I was just in Vegas, and he's like, I'm not gonna lie, he's like, I love it. I wake up, I can drive when I want, how I want, completely flexible, right? So there are a lot of benefits to Uber and Lyft. But I think the asterisk on though, all those benefits, all the positive aspects, is that things have gone a bit downhill. And I think both things can be true. This is where I think being self-aware of cognitive dissonance is important, where both things are true. There are a lot of benefits to Uber and Lyft. There is a lot of good things Uber and Lyft has done, and I've mentioned it in a lot of videos where it's like, if you look at it, there's been, hundreds of thousands of new jobs being created by Uber and Lyft. I've interviewed people who immigrated to this country and said, hey, you know what, I couldn't get a job, I don't have a resume or a CV, it was really difficult because I don't have a degree, and I've been trying to figure out what jobs I can do. Uber and Lyft was there for me, and I can now drive for Uber and Lyft. I can put food on the table. I can save up money for, like, say, my kids' college fund, et cetera, right? So that's, I think, a tremendous amount of positives. At the same time, Uber and Lyft definitely does not treat its drivers the best. I hate to say it, but we all know that, right? I think there's a lot of negative things that Uber and Lyft has been doing and continues to do. And while I think some of it I can understand, I think it's always important to look at both sides, a lot of it is messed up. And there's no other phrase I can use beyond saying it is messed up. Both things are true. But I think one thing stands as a very clear sign to me, and that is I think things are slowly getting better. I think for the first time, and I have touched upon this here and there, I think for the first time things are getting better. Where I say to a lot of drivers, and I say this in pretty much any video that I do about this, should you drive for Lyft and Uber? Is it worth it? Do you make good money? Blah, blah, blah. Is you try it out, right? You don't know until you test the waters. Your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver. And what's interesting is near the end of last year and the beginning of this year, if someone said to me, should I drive? I'd probably be like, no, it's not worth it. That would be my stance. It'd be not a full-on no, but it'd be most likely no, Now, though, I think things are slowly improving where I'm like, you know what? It's now getting better and better. And I think the reason why is with all this legislative bodies looking at stuff, the laws being put into place, I think things are slowly going to improve for ride sharing around the country. And I'm still waiting. It hasn't happened yet. But I'm still waiting for some of a federal thing to be put into place. And I do think we're getting there, right? I've used this analogy before, which is very different, but I think similar in some ways, similar to what's going on with legalizing marijuana. I'm not a smoker, just not my thing. I don't judge those who do, just not my thing. But, you start off with like Colorado and Washington. Was it, I think, Colorado? Yeah, I know, those two. And then you had California, and then you have all these states now. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they say, okay, you know what, most states are now legalizing marijuana. Let's make it a federal thing. Now, of course, two very different things. Legalizing marijuana, or marijuana in general, and Uber and Lyft. Two very different things, of course. But I think that kind of breadcrumb effect, where you have like a little bit here in this one state, be like, oh, they just legalized that, huh? And this is happening in this other state, and this is happening in this other state. And then other states are looking what other states are doing. There's a big snowball effect I'm seeing when it comes to driving for Uber and Lyft, where I think there's a lot of new stuff being talked about in every state around the country to improve things for Uber drivers and Lyft drivers. I do still think we have a long way to go, but in terms of me looking at this, I do think, like I've said numerous times, your location is important. Like if you live in Massachusetts, it has never been a better time to be an Uber driver and a Lyft driver. If you live in Massachusetts, of course I know there's 49 other states. Massachusetts is just one of them. But if you look at what's happening around the country, there's never been more talk. And I think this makes me optimistic, at least I hope, that this kind of like dark era of Uber and Lyft that kind of existed around last year is slowly improving. And I think the big thing is talking about this, putting it out in the open, having it be well known and having people talk about this, I think creates a lot more word and just a lot more publicity about what drivers are actually going through, their financial struggles, and a lot more. And so I think when it comes to should you drive for Uber and Lyft later this year, or this year in general, like is it worth it to drive? I think slowly my answer is now going from no to yes, but you want to be observant, right? It does depend a lot on your area, not just because of the logistics of your city layout and everything like I've talked about before a million times, but also the law. That's now a big factor that never, not saying it didn't exist before, but now I'm like, hey, if you live in Massachusetts versus Connecticut, take New England, even though they're right next to each other, two very different economics and laws, regarding ride sharing and Uber and Lyft. This is huge. And I think this is something that is slowly improving, right? And so we see with a lot of drivers, as I said before numerous times, I think the biggest thing is to test it out if you're considering driving. Sign up, test out the waters, do it on maybe Friday and Saturday nights, Saturday and Sunday mornings, during the week, however you want. Feel it out. If it works really well, keep driving. If it doesn't, then stop. But I think this is kind of a cool thing I'm seeing right now. Again, this is, very fireside chat, raw, unedited style video. I'm just kind of talking off the cusp. I think it's kind of cool to see that I think for the first time, there's a lot of commotion. I think that's the best word I can use. A lot of commotion about Uber and Lyft. And this commotion, well, it seems just kind of random and a bunch of like random old dudes maybe yapping about law and ride sharing and Uber and Lyft. The big takeaway is that there's now talk about better protection, getting better wages, all this kind of stuff. Unions are now a big topic. With all these topics talking about more and more, all that does is increase better legislation and laws and rules for rideshare drivers, so let's say being independent contractors with benefits, like I've talked about. And this will equal a way better landscape as time continues on. And I'm seeing this path. As time continues on, that things are getting better and better for rideshare drivers. I still think we have a long way to go, and I still think this process is slower than I'd like, but there's definitely a trajectory being seen. There's definitely a trajectory here. And I think that's a huge positive thing to look at for the future.